The clang of metal trays echoed through the mess hall as rows of weary German prisoners shuffled inside. It was the summer of 1943 deep in the heart of Texas. One young Afrika Korps corporal, still sunburned from the desert campaign, froze in disbelief as his eyes fell on the line ahead. Instead of watery soup and stale bread, he saw steaming roasts of beef, thick slices of soft white bread, bowls of butter, fresh vegetables, and pitchers of milk. At the far end, a large freezer hummed steadily, churning out scoops of ice cream so cold that steam rose as it met the hot air. And beside it, almost unreal, stood a Coca-Cola vending machine, the glass bottles sweating with beads of condensation. He whispered to himself, half terrified, half overjoyed, "Is this really a prison?" Back in Europe, his family stood in ration lines, clinging to paper coupons for a few ounces of margarine or ersatz coffee. The German army had been cutting rations for soldiers since 1942, often leaving men with little more than black bread and thin stew. Yet here in captivity, thousands of miles away, America fed its enemies like honored guests. For many Axis prisoners, this was the first shocking taste of abundance of a nation whose wealth seemed endless, whose factories produced not only tanks and bombers, but also butter, sugar, chocolate, and endless rivers of Coca-Cola. To the POWs, it felt like stepping into another world. Propaganda had painted America as greedy, corrupt, decadent. But as they raised their spoons to taste sweet, creamy ice cream for the first time in months, they realized something terrifying. The propaganda was collapsing, melting like the dessert in their hands. This was not just food, it was a revelation. By 1943, the war had turned against the Axis. In North Africa, after months of grueling desert battles, Field Marshal Rommel's proud Afrika Korps collapsed. On the 13th of May 1943, more than 25,000 German and Italian soldiers surrendered in Tunisia. The Allies faced a new logistical puzzle: what to do with such a massive flood of prisoners. Britain, already stretched thin by food shortages, and Luftwaffe raids had little space or supplies to hold them. The United States, however, had both space and abundance. Ships that once carried tanks and fuel to Africa now returned with thousands of captured enemy soldiers. By war's end, over 425,000 Axis POWs, most of them German, but also nearly 500,000 Italians and a few thousand Japanese would find themselves scattered across America. From the pine forests of Mississippi to the wheat fields of Kansas, from the deserts of Arizona to the snowy plains of Minnesota, America built a vast network of prison camps. Nearly 500 main camps and hundreds of satellite facilities appeared almost overnight, dotting 46 states. Many were located in rural areas close to farms or factories where labor was needed. Surrounded by barbed wire and watchtowers, these camps looked formidable from the outside. But once inside, POWs found a world they had not expected: cafeterias serving hot meals 3 times a day, recreation halls, libraries, and even canteens stocked with goods most civilians in Europe could not dream of. The secret behind this treatment lay in international law and American self-interest. Under the 1,929 Geneva Convention, prisoners of war were to be treated humanely, given food equivalent to that of the captor nation's depot troops, and provided with medical care, shelter, and opportunities for recreation. Washington took this obligation seriously, not only for moral reasons but also for practical ones. American leaders hoped that by treating Axis POWs well, the Germans and Japanese might treat captured American soldiers with similar respect. The Red Cross frequently inspected the camps, ensuring that conditions matched international standards. For the United States, it was also a chance to showcase democracy's strength. We are so wealthy, so powerful, that we can afford to treat even our enemies with generosity. While Europe starved, the United States produced food on a scale the world had never seen. By the early 1942s, American farms were churning out record harvests: wheat, corn, milk, butter, beef, and poultry. Wartime rationing touched American civilians, but in truth, the nation's agricultural output was so massive that the U.S. could feed its troops overseas, supply its allies under Lend-Lease, and still have enough left to provide for hundreds of thousands of prisoners. Ice cream, in particular, became a symbol of American abundance. Dairy farms in Wisconsin, Iowa, and New York churned out milk and cream in such quantities that even POWs were given scoops of vanilla or chocolate on Sundays. Meanwhile, Coca-Cola, branded as the pause that refreshes, followed US troops wherever they went. By government decree, Coke built bottling plants close to military bases, and these same facilities provided bottles of soda to the prison camps. For Axis POWs, the taste of an ice-cold Coca-Cola, something they had only seen in magazines or propaganda posters, was almost surreal. Prisoners were not given cash, but they earned wages for labor, usually 80 cents a day, credited in the form of scrip. These paper tokens could be used at camp canteens to buy personal items, cigarettes, candy writing, paper, soap, and most famously Coca-Cola. To a German or Italian soldier who had known only scarcity, stepping up to a counter, laying down a few paper tokens, and receiving a frosty bottle of soda felt like a revelation. Some wrote in their diaries that the simple act of twisting off the cap and hearing the hiss of carbonation was unforgettable. For them, it was not just a drink, it was proof of America's unimaginable industrial might. Daily routines in the camps shocked the new arrivals. They woke to hot breakfasts, eggs, bacon, oatmeal bread with butter and steaming coffee. Lunches might include beef stew or pork chops with mashed potatoes and vegetables. Dinner could be roast meat, fresh bread, and fruit. POWs accustomed to watery cabbage soup and a scrap of black bread could hardly believe it. On Sundays, meals often ended with dessert, ice cream, pie, or cake. The quantity and quality stunned them. Many prisoners actually gained weight during captivity, some by 10 to 20 pounds in a matter of months. American guards joked that their prisoners looked healthier than the men at the front. The contrast with life back home was painful. German civilians in 1943 were restricted to strict rations, 2,000 calories a day at best, often less. Butter, sugar, and real coffee had vanished from stores. Families queued for hours to receive ersatz products. Soldiers at the front fared no better. Rations shrank as supply lines collapsed under Allied bombing. To be captured and sent to America was ironically to escape hunger. On the surface, feeding one's enemies so well might seem strange, but for America it was a calculated decision. First, it complied with international law. Second, it saved resources. Healthy prisoners were less likely to resist or rebel, reducing the need for harsh discipline. Third, it supported the American self-image as a moral superpower. To show the world, especially neutral nations, that democracy meant abundance and humanity was a propaganda weapon as powerful as any tank. And finally, there was a practical economic benefit: prisoners could work. They were employed in agriculture, forestry, and even some light industry, filling the gap left by the 16 million Americans in uniform. By keeping them well-fed and content, the U.S. ensured a steady, reliable workforce. For many Axis soldiers, the shock went beyond full stomachs. It challenged their worldview. Nazi propaganda had painted Americans as greedy, decadent, and weak. Yet here in captivity, the United States provided more food, more variety, and more comforts than Germany could give its own people. One German lieutenant wrote after the war, "It was in the American camps that we realized we had lost not only the war but the future. They had ice cream while we counted our potatoes." The POW camps became in a strange way showcases of American prosperity. Every spoonful of ice cream, every fizzing bottle of Coca-Cola whispered the same truth: America had the means to fight a global war and still treat its enemies with generosity. And this realization, more than any weapon, left prisoners stunned. When the first convoys of Axis prisoners arrived in America, many of them braced for the worst. They imagined bread crusts, watery soup, and harsh treatment. Instead, what awaited them was nothing short of astonishing 3 full meals a day, hot, fresh, and served with the kind of abundance they had not seen since before the war. For many, that first breakfast in captivity was the moment their entire worldview cracked. A typical breakfast inside a US POW camp in 1944 could rival a hotel buffet back home. German and Italian soldiers filed into orderly mess halls to find trays piled with scrambled eggs, bacon, hot oatmeal, fresh milk, butter, jam, and coffee, strong enough to jolt them awake. White bread, soft and fluffy, was served in thick slices, a luxury unknown in wartime Europe, where bread was often coarse, mixed with sawdust or potato flour. For men who had spent months on hard crusts and ersatz coffee, the simple sight of a glass of cold milk was enough to bring stunned silence. One Italian prisoner later wrote, "We had to remind ourselves we were captives." No soldier in Italy had eaten so well in years. By midday, the camp kitchens run by U.S. Army cooks and sometimes by trained POW assistants served hearty meals of beef, stew, pork chops, roast chicken or meatloaf, often with mashed potatoes, gravy beans or fresh vegetables. Fruit appeared regularly. Apples, oranges, bananas, produce that many POWs had not seen in years because German civilians lived under strict rationing. Dinner often repeated the pattern: meat, bread, butter, vegetables and dessert. Camp menus were planned to provide 3,000,3,500 calories per day, meeting Geneva Convention standards. For comparison, the average German civilian at home struggled to reach 15,000,2,000 calories, while frontline Wehrmacht soldiers often starved on less. It was little wonder that many POWs in America gained 10 to 20 pounds during their first year of captivity. If one food captured the essence of American abundance, it was ice cream. In the summer months, dairy trucks pulled up to camps carrying tubs of vanilla chocolate or strawberry. On Sundays, long lines of POWs formed eagerly, trays in hand, waiting for a scoop of cold, creamy dessert. For Germans who had not tasted real dairy products in years, it was both a marvel and a humiliation. To receive ice cream as a prisoner while my family stood in ration lines back home was unbelievable, recalled one former POW. Some described the first spoonful as like tasting America itself, sweet, cold, and limitless. The ice cream machine became a symbol of everything that separated America from war-torn Europe. Equally powerful was the presence of Coca-Cola. America had declared that every soldier should have access to the drink wherever he was stationed. To make this possible, bottling plants were built near military bases, and many supplied POW camps as well. For just a few cents in scrip, prisoners could walk into the camp canteen and purchase a frosty bottle, its glass sweating in the Texas heat. The sound of the cap popping off the fizzing bubbles and the sharp sweetness stunned men who had grown up under propaganda, mocking Coca-Cola as decadent American sugar water. To them, it was more than refreshment, it was a glimpse into a consumer culture that seemed to overflow with possibility. The shock did not end with daily meals. On major holidays, American camps staged full celebrations. At Thanksgiving, POWs were served roast turkey with stuffing, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pie. At Christmas, the mess halls filled with decorations, choirs, sang carols, and tables groaned under platters of ham, potatoes, vegetables, and of course ice cream and cake. For soldiers who had once sworn to fight America to the death, the experience was disarming. It was hard to maintain hatred when chewing on pumpkin pie topped with whipped cream. Some wrote that these meals were the first time they began to doubt not only Nazi propaganda, but the very purpose of the war. Food became a weapon of quiet persuasion. Each spoonful reminded the prisoners of America's wealth, its logistics, its sheer capacity to feed millions at home and abroad. Axis propaganda had insisted that the United States was weak, corrupted by luxury, incapable of endurance. Yet here the prisoners ate better than they had as free men in Europe. This dissonance shattered illusions. We were supposed to believe America was crumbling, one German sergeant recalled, but we could not deny what we saw on our plates. If this was weakness, then we had already lost. Statistics only reinforced the shock. U.S. agriculture produced over 127 billion pounds of milk in 1944, enough to supply both its troops and its prisoners with ice cream and dairy daily. Coca-Cola, meanwhile, had promised to provide every American soldier with a 5-cent Coke no matter where he was stationed. To achieve this, the company built 64 bottling plants overseas during the war. These same channels ensured that POWs behind the wire could taste the same beverage as the GIs guarding them. The contrast could not have been sharper. While German families at home queued hours for half a loaf of rye bread, their captured sons sipped Coca-Cola and licked ice cream cones. Perhaps the most profound effect of this abundance was not physical but psychological. For many POWs, that first taste of American ice cream or Coke was the moment they realized that their leaders had lied. Germany had promised a 1,000-year Reich, yet it could not provide bread. America, painted as decadent and doomed, had enough not only to fight across oceans but also to fatten its enemies. It was a spoonful of ice cream that melted away illusions, and left in their place an uneasy respect, even admiration for the nation that held them captive. The barbed wire of a POW camp in the United States was not merely a prison boundary, it was a border between two worlds. Inside the fences, thousands of Axis soldiers discovered that captivity did not mean idleness. America, fighting a global war, with over 16 million citizens in uniform, faced severe labor shortages. Factories, farms, and forests all cried out for workers. And so the men who once marched under the swastika or Mussolini's banners were put to work plowing American soil, harvesting crops, cutting timber, and in some cases even repairing military equipment under strict supervision. The arrangement was extraordinary. Enemies of the United States were helping to sustain its wartime economy. Labor was not forced at gunpoint. It was carefully structured under the rules of the Geneva Convention. Prisoners were paid around 80 cents a day, but not in US dollars. Instead, they received special camp-issued tokens or coupons that could only be spent inside the barbed wire world of the canteen. This preserved discipline prevented black market dealings and at the same time created a small economy of its own. With their earnings, POWs could buy Coca-Cola ice cream, cigarettes, chocolate bars, toiletries, and stationery for writing letters home. Many remembered the canteen as a miniature marketplace, a fragment of normal life transplanted behind the fences. For the prisoners' work carried its own paradox. Every swing of the axe or row of cotton harvested reminded them that they were contributing to the prosperity of the very country defeating their homeland. Yet the pay, the food, and the relative freedom compared to other fronts made labor attractive. In fact, many volunteered eagerly. Under the hot Midwestern sun, German and Italian soldiers picked fruit or baled hay, often laughing and joking with American farmers who supervised them. At night, they returned to camps where ice cream or soda awaited in the canteen. It was captivity, yes, but it was also survival and unexpectedly cultural exchange. No story illustrates this better than the fate of Italian POWs after Italy's armistice in September 1943. Overnight, tens of thousands of captured Italians were reclassified from enemies to co-belligerents. Nearly 4,500 joined Italian service units ISUs, wearing distinctive uniforms with green, white, red insignia. They worked in U.S. depots, ports and factories, unloading ships, repairing vehicles and managing supplies. Their contribution was immense, over 90 million man-days of labor, valued at $230 million, a staggering sum that helped keep America's war machine running smoothly. Many Italians remembered their time in the ISUs not as imprisonment but as an opportunity. They earned more freedom, better pay, and respect from American officers. Some later said they felt closer to allies than captives, grateful for the dignity offered to them. If the mess hall symbolized abundance, the canteen symbolized freedom. Within its small shelves, Axis soldiers discovered the trinkets of American consumer life: Hershey bars, Lucky Strike, cigarettes, Coca-Cola bottles, chewing gum, postcards, and even canned peaches. With scrip in hand, they lined up like customers chatting in German, Italian, or broken English. Buying a bottle of Coke became more than a transaction, it was a ritual, an initiation into American culture. The fizz of the soda, the sweetness of the chocolate, the aroma of roasted peanuts sold in paper bags, these were experiences no propaganda could erase. For many, the canteen was the first place they felt like human beings again rather than cogs in a war machine. Work often carried POWs outside camp fences under guard. In farming communities across the South and Midwest, locals initially eyed these men with suspicion. But as weeks turned to months, barriers softened. Farmers saw hard-working hands. POWs saw generosity in the form of lemonade pies or a smile from a farmer's daughter. Some camps allowed supervised social events, soccer matches, concerts, even church services, shared with nearby towns. On Sundays, church bells rang both for the locals and the men behind the wire, reminding everyone that faith, if nothing else, crossed national lines. For some, these encounters blossomed into friendships. Letters were exchanged, gifts of food were quietly passed through fences, and in rare cases, love stories unfolded, leading to marriages after the war. Though forbidden by official policy, human hearts often ignored regulations. These small bonds hinted at a larger truth: abundance, kindness, and respect could transform enemies into neighbors. Beyond food and labor, America used another quiet weapon: ideas. Camps were stocked with libraries, film projectors, and even newspapers like Der Ruf, created by German POWs under American guidance. Prisoners could read Goethe or Shakespeare, watch Hollywood films, and attend classes in English or history. Some saw it as propaganda, others saw it as a gift. Either way, the exposure left marks. They gave us bread, milk, and books, one former POW recalled. It was impossible not to compare this with what we had known before. Education combined with food and consumer goods formed a silent campaign of persuasion. In the end, labor and scrip were more than economic arrangements. They were bridges between cultures, between enemies, and between the despair of war and the promise of peace. Each coin of scrip exchanged for a Coke, each paycheck spent on chocolate or ice cream, chipped away at the hatred instilled by years of propaganda. America's message was not shouted through megaphones or painted on posters. It was whispered through work meals and everyday dignity. Here, even our enemies live better than free men in Europe. The prisoners knew it. They could not ignore the strength of the nation that captured them. America was not only a land of tanks and bombers, it was a land of farms, factories, and supermarkets so abundant that even those who came as foes could not help but be impressed. Behind the wire, among bottles of Coke and scoops of ice cream, Axis POWs discovered something their leaders had hidden from them. Prosperity was the most powerful propaganda of all. By the winter of 1944, the war had entered its most savage phase. In Europe, the Wehrmacht launched its desperate counterattack through the Ardennes, igniting the Battle of the Bulge. American soldiers shivered in foxholes, shells rained down on frozen forests, and casualty lists grew by the hour. Yet thousands of miles away in the heart of Texas or the fields of Kansas, another scene was unfolding, one so surreal that many prisoners later described it as a dream. Inside the mess halls of U.S. POW camps, Christmas carols echoed, tables groaned under roasted turkeys, glazed hams, mashed potatoes, pumpkin pies, and most dazzling of all, tubs of ice cream. Outside, barbed wire glistened with frost. Inside, men who had once sworn allegiance to Hitler or Mussolini sat stunned before feasts greater than anything their families could hope for back home. For German prisoners, the Christmas of 1944 became a haunting paradox. Radios in the camps carried grim bulletins from Europe. Bastogne was surrounded. Allied troops fought for survival, and the Reich proclaimed imminent victory. But the very prisoners listening to those words were spooning whipped cream onto pie, sipping Coca-Cola from sweating bottles, and biting into chocolate cake. One recalled, "I could not understand. My brothers were dying in the snow, and here I was, a captive eating turkey until I was full." Another wrote in his diary, "Our guards offered us a toast with Coke. We were supposed to hate them. Instead, we felt ashamed. The holiday meals were not accidents. They were deliberate acts of policy. America wanted to show its prisoners and the Red Cross inspectors who visited that it not only obeyed the Geneva Convention, but surpassed it. The symbolism was unmistakable. While the Third Reich relied on fear and scarcity, the United States wielded abundance as a weapon more potent than any gun. For many prisoners, the turning point came with a single scoop of ice cream. In Germany, even children had not tasted such luxury for years. Dairy farms were drained by military requisitions, sugar was rationed to crumbs, and chocolate existed only on the black market. To receive ice cream as a prisoner, sweet, cold, plentiful, was almost unthinkable. It triggered a wave of cognitive dissonance. Propaganda had preached that America was weak, decadent, and corrupt. Yet here, the supposed decadence was feeding their enemies better than Germany could feed its own soldiers. One German officer admitted later, "The first spoon of American ice cream was the moment I understood that the war was lost." If Christmas 1944 shattered illusions, the 8th of May, 1945, Victory in Europe Day, made them collapse entirely. Loudspeakers crackled across the camps with the announcement Germany has surrendered unconditionally. For a moment, silence reigned. Then guards rolled in crates of Coca-Cola, distributing bottles, freely telling the prisoners, "The war is over. Drink to peace." Many POWs held the bottles in trembling hands, unable to decide whether to cheer or mourn. Some lifted their Coke in solemn toasts, others wept silently. For them, the brown, fizzy liquid symbolized not only defeat but survival. They were alive, fed and safe, while millions of their comrades lay dead in ruins across Europe. The emotional impact of these events cannot be overstated. POWs felt humiliation knowing their families starved while they ate in abundance. They felt shame realizing their captors treated them with more humanity than their own regimes had shown. And they felt gratitude, however, reluctant for the food, the safety, the ice cream that softened the bitterness of defeat. The propaganda that had painted America as a land of greed now seemed absurd. One German lieutenant later confessed, "The war ended for me not when I heard the surrender on the radio, but months earlier, when I saw Americans give their prisoners meat, milk, and ice cream, while our own people starved. That was when I knew we could not win." The high point of this psychological transformation was not a battle or a speech, but these small, visceral moments. The clinking of Coca-Cola bottles on VE Day, the steaming platters of turkey at Christmas, the ice cream melting under the Texas sun, while across the ocean, German cities burned. These were symbols that spoke louder than any propaganda leaflet dropped from the sky. They told prisoners in the simplest, most undeniable terms that America's power came not only from tanks and bombers, but from its farms, its factories, and its ability to make life sweet, even in wartime. The climax of the POW experience in America was the realization that the United States had built a civilization of abundance so vast it could extend even to its enemies. This recognition did not come through lectures or threats. It came through the daily ritual of meals, the shocking generosity of holiday feasts, and the fizz of a Coke bottle handed out on the day of surrender. For Axis prisoners, these moments burned into memory more deeply than battles. They were living proof that the world they had believed in was crumbling while the world of their captors was rising in triumph. The spoon, the bottle, the feast, these were the weapons of America's quietest but most devastating victory. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the fate of more than 425,000 Axis prisoners in America entered a new chapter: repatriation. But for many, their journey home carried something unexpected: memories of Coca-Cola, ice cream, and tables that never ran empty. These memories, humble as they seemed, shaped both their individual lives and the broader legacy of the war. Between 1945 and 1946 trains and ships carried German and Italian prisoners back across the Atlantic. Many returned reluctantly. Inside America's camps they had eaten more, worked less, and lived in better conditions than they had known in years. The thought of returning to ruined cities, bombed-out homes, and ration lines filled them with dread. "We left captivity fatter than when we entered one," German recalled, and went home to children with hollow cheeks. Another admitted it was almost cruel to show us such abundance, then send us back to starvation. Yet that very contrast reinforced the lesson America wanted to teach: democracy and prosperity went hand in hand. By treating prisoners generously, the United States had achieved a propaganda coup without a single poster. Food had spoken louder than slogans. Each scoop of ice cream, each frosty bottle of Coke, each Thanksgiving turkey whispered a message: America is strong because America can provide. The Geneva Convention had been fulfilled and even surpassed, turning captivity into a stage for democracy's showcase. Axis prisoners realized that the war had not been decided only by tanks, planes, or battleships. It had been decided in fields of wheat, dairies, and bottling plants that kept millions fed while Europe starved. The contrast with Germany was devastating. While POWs dined on butter and beef, civilians at home lined up for hours to receive scraps. Mothers struggled to feed children. Soldiers at the front grew gaunt. For many prisoners, this disparity collapsed years of indoctrination. Nazi propaganda had promised a Reich of abundance, yet the reality was scarcity and fear. America, mocked as decadent, had abundance to spare even for its enemies. The story was particularly striking among Italians. After the 1943 armistice, nearly 45,000 joined Italian service units working in depots and ports under American supervision. They wore uniforms, earned wages, and sometimes mingled with American communities. Their contribution, 90 million man-days of labor worth $230 million, was a gift to the U.S. war effort, but also a gift to themselves. Many returned home convinced that cooperation with the West offered Italy a future. Some carried American habits, love of coffee, chocolate, even baseball back across the Atlantic. For them, the memory of American abundance became part of Italy's post-war reconstruction. Among Germans too, the effect was profound. Many former POWs became leaders, teachers, or writers who remembered their captivity not with bitterness but with reflection. Some authored memoirs describing the shock of being offered Coca-Cola in Texas or ice cream in Louisiana, while their families starved in Dresden. They contrasted the brutality of Nazi rule with the fairness of American captivity. These voices, small at first, became part of a larger chorus in post-war Germany that helped anchor democracy. For them, America was not only the conqueror, but also the provider, the nation that proved power could be wielded with generosity. Historians often describe America's military might in terms of tanks and planes, but the POW experience revealed another dimension: soft power. The ability to feed, clothe, and even indulge one's enemies demonstrated an industrial strength beyond imagination. It showed that victory was not only about destroying the enemy's capacity to fight, but about overwhelming him with a vision of a better world. A prisoner holding a cone of vanilla ice cream or sipping a cold Coke could not escape the conclusion America's way of life had already triumphed. The US also combined material abundance with cultural re-education. Camps offered books, newspapers, and classes that encouraged democratic values. Coupled with full stomachs, these lessons resonated deeply. Prisoners compared the fairness of American guards with the lies of Nazi or fascist propaganda. In their diaries, many admitted that they began to admire the very system they had once been told to destroy. When they returned to Europe, they carried not only hunger for food, but hunger for freedom, for stability, for a society that could produce such prosperity. Even decades later, former POWs could vividly recall their first Coke or their first American ice cream. To them, these were not trivial treats, they were symbols. They represented survival, dignity, and the realization that the world was larger, freer, and richer than the dictators had allowed them to see. Some returned to visit the United States in peacetime, seeking out the towns near their old camps. Others told their children, "I learned about America not on the battlefield, but in a mess hall with a spoon in my hand." In the end, the story of POWs in America was not just about food. It was about the power of abundance to disarm hatred. The United States proved that a nation could fight a total war and still treat its captives humanely. It proved that strength was not only measured in bombs dropped, but in meals served. And it proved that the greatest weapon against tyranny was not cruelty, but the quiet confidence of prosperity. As Europe staggered into the post-war years, those who had once been prisoners carried back with them the taste of American generosity. It lived in their memories as vividly as any battlefield: the fizz of a Coke, the sweetness of vanilla ice cream, the comfort of bread and butter served without fear. These simple things became part of a greater legacy, the idea that democracy could not only win wars, but also win hearts. Picture a former POW in 1947 standing in front of a small ice cream parlor in Munich. He buys a cone of vanilla, takes a bite, and smiles faintly. For a moment, he is back in Texas, back behind barbed wire, tasting America's promise in a spoonful of cream. In that moment, he knows the war was not only lost on the battlefield. It was lost at the dinner table where abundance defeated scarcity and kindness outshone tyranny.